some ARPA money?
Well, just a report on where we are, yeah. Potentially.
Their presentation, homeless problem. Oh, right, got that. That's insane. What?
We're ready? Yeah. Okay. Good morning. We're calling the Stewardship Subcommittee to order. It's 11:42 a.m. Present for the record are Mayor Pro Tem Perkins, Councilor Campbell, and virtually we have Councilor Riley.
Before, I just
Yeah,
want to
can you hear
check
us?
and make sure that Mike can hear us. And everything's working.
I can hear you. Can you hear
us?
me?
Because he's talking, but we can hear
I can hear you, but
it. We can hear you.
Mike, I can hear you. This is Josh.
oh, that's interesting.
I'm saying we can't hear you to him. Listen.
I'll let them know, Josh, and see what happens.
Sounds good. I'm assuming they can't hear me either since there was no response.
Yeah.
What says she can hear everything? See everybody.
Yeah, I think they can hear us,
They
but
can
it's
hear
not
him.
the, it's just not the other way. If he wants to talk, he could just text me and I can read it. Mike says.
Speakerphone.
I'm not hearing from I've been trying to text him.
Confirm
Yeah.
that you're not muted. He's not. It's not. No, and you can see when he talks, you can.
Yeah, it says he's trying to.
Are the speakers in the room turned up?
They're up, yeah. That. I can have Lisa come back.
Yeah, oh, good idea. Yeah, this is beyond my.
Okay, thanks. Oh, it's just better.
Yeah, so Mike says he can hear us, but. And they can hear each other, so. This Josh from CoCap is online as well, and. I think the folks that are online can communicate to each other, but they obviously can't communicate with us. Well, let's hold off for just a bit.
How about now, Eric?
When are you leaving there, Mr. King?
Oh, not for a few weeks, 3 weeks.
Excellent.
When are you going to Pride tomorrow?
Good question. I signed up sometime in the afternoon. Yeah, you?
I think at 1. I have to. Jake's doing some soccer tournaments, so I have to run back and forth to that.
Fun.
So cool.
No, we do that. Yes.
Do another check for those that are online. Can somebody just confirm that you can hear us?
I can hear you.
And speak
Eric.
back so we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
All right, Mike is talking, but we can't hear you yet.
Yeah.
We're still.
Can you still hear me, Josh?
I can still hear you, Mike.
Okay.
Can you hear me as well?
I think I need to reboot this.
Somewhat infuriating, you would think, after how many years of doing this, huh? But it's just the way it goes.
Always a ghost in the machine somewhere.
Yeah. Eric King says they're rebooting now.
Aha.
When in doubt, reboot, right?
I wonder if it has anything to do with us being panelists. I have two separate calendar invites. Maybe one allows us in and one doesn't. I don't know. But weird that we can hear one another.
Yeah. I one calendar invite as a panelist because originally they were thinking I was going to come as a be in person, and I woke up sick this morning, so that's why I'm remote.
Uh-huh.
That's okay. It's not. They can vibrate log line.
Right. No, it'll be like an interesting to see.
Hi there, can you all hear me now?
It's like a big,
Hey, and why don't we have Josh try going also? Josh, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, how can you hear me?
oh, are we on mute? I don't think Mike.
No, we're not on mute.
Mike, can you hear us?
Yes.
Oh, good.
my
Okay.
goodness.
And did you hear Josh?
Can you hear me as well?
We heard you. We're all good.
Perfect.
Sorry about that.
Take two.
Yeah, let's go. All right.
Calling to order the Stewardship Subcommittee meeting at 11:50 a.m. Present for the record are Mayor Pro Tem Perkins, Councilor Campbell, and Councilor Riley is joining us virtually. My name is Mickey Dirting. I'm Strategic Initiatives Manager out of the City Manager's Office, helping to facilitate today's meeting. At the dais is City Manager Eric King and City Attorney Mary Winters. We have 4 items on the agenda. First one is approval of minutes, and the second one is American Rescue Plan Act funding allocation presentation by Finance Reporting Manager Kimala Lutz, and then we'll have a presentation from Central Oregon Civic Action Project presentation regarding the youth homelessness problem statement, and last we'll have tax incentive discussion as a follow-up to May 15th City Council work session by Urban Renewal Project Manager Jonathan Taylor. So approval of minutes, please.
Move to approve the March 25th, 2024 meeting minutes.
I will second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Hi. And just to note, I mean, you may have set it up this way, but it's not allowing me to turn on my camera. It says that the host has disabled that or something like that. When I click on start video,
Okay.
it says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Okay, well, we should be able to correct that. We'll go ahead and get started with Kimala. So this is really just an update on American Rescue Plan Act funding that the city received, and some kind of a status update and some general direction from you all at the end. I'll turn it over to Kimala.
Good morning, all. Oops, jumped ahead there. My name is Kimala Lutz. I am the Accounting and Financial Reporting Manager here at the city, and I'm here today to give you a quick update and recap of our ARPA, or American Rescue Plan Act dollars that we have received. So for a quick recap, a quick reminder of ARPA funding received to date. We've received a little over $14 million in May of 2021 and June of 2022. Some key dates to remember as we go through this: all of the funds must be obligated in December of 2024, and all funds must be spent by December of 2026. Earlier this fiscal year in November of 2023, the Treasury released some updated guidance in regards to the definition of an obligation and really kind of honed in on what they consider an obligation, which essentially means that we have to have all of these funds on some type of agreement or contract in order for the Treasury to consider them obligated. So with that, I'll jump into, so where have we been with ARPA and what have we done? Total spent to date of ARPA funding is close to $6 million. Total amounts obligated but not yet spent, so that meaning that these funds are sitting on contracts, meeting that Treasury obligation, about 7.8. In preparation for hitting those deadlines and meeting those Treasury obligations, we've determined that there is almost $340,000 of ARPA funds that are available to be re-obligated in order to meet those deadlines. So with that, and I'm going to do this a little backwards, I'm going to give my recommendation and give a little bit of context as to why I'm giving that recommendation. My recommendation today, our staff's recommendation today, is to not obligate this remaining $340,000 of additional funds at this time in order to determine our house list funding needs and then backfill with ARPA if need be. We will come back in September of 2024 with recommendations on the reallocation of these available funds, but really dependent on kind of the shelters and where they're at today. So with that, I'll jump in and give a little bit of context to the city supported shelters. As all of you know, 4 different shelters.
How long has it been?
You don't mind muting folks that are online? We're getting some, or those that are online, if you could mute yourselves, we're hearing some background noise.
The irony. We waited for 20
I know.
minutes to be able to
Now-
hear you. Now we want you to mute yourself.
Oh, and there we see Mike. Great.
Hi.
Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, sorry about that. So jumping back in, current state of the city supported shelters, really the main thing that we're looking at here is looking to the state and what funding that they are going to provide for these shelters going forward. And leaving those funds, these ARPA funds, unobligated at this time and waiting until September gives us a little bit more leeway for the state to determine what funding they are going to be willing to give. So as you can see in this table here, our shelters will be supported without state funding through winter of 2024. I have December here, but it's kind of December, January, February, depending on contract dates. Housing will be bringing at a later date some of these shelter contracts to extend the contract dates in order to increase the flexibility to best utilize the ARPA and state funding should it come in. With the state funding, we'll be able to operate these shelters through December of 2025. Should this state funding come through and we don't need to re-obligate these ARPA funds to the shelters, the city did come up with, we brainstormed internally with the city manager's office, some ideas to utilize those shelters instead of obligating them towards houseless. A couple of these I have listed here for you. Some of these are programs that we have used previous ARPA dollars for that have been really successful. So affordable housing grants, middle income grants, the neighbor impact utility assistance, and a couple new ideas here. The financial feasibility study for the future city hall, and then staff support for automated traffic enforcement startup costs. So to circle back to really the recommendation here today and the ask for stewardship is that we do not obligate this additional $340,000 of funds to determine what those houseless needs will be. And then we'll come back in September to provide an update and recommendations of the reallocation.
Can I ask a question of Amy? Can you, sorry to make you do that. So you were recently with the county, so kind of understanding the whole funding picture. And the county, it was to say, can we be more flexible with the money that the ARPA money that you have sort of pledged to this
Yes.
Okay.
For folks online, Amy Fraley with the Housing Department, Senior Program Manager for Houselessness Solutions. The county went ahead and moved the $750,000, authorized it to go into general shelter operations. It had been tied to the Franklin. At first, we tied it to outdoor shelter. Then we tied it to the Franklin, and time 3, we have learned our lesson and we're just going to do general shelter operations. Most likely that will be put forth to the navigation center. When we talk about those dates, that date in 2025 is based on the funding that we've received previously through OHCS. And so we're optimistic with that 65 million allocation from this short session that we will receive more money. It's just a matter of when it comes through.
Yeah, so it's delicate dance. We haven't received, here is the money yet, so that's why we want to be really cautious about
Yeah,
the
of course.
330,000. Hold it just in case we need it. And then as we shared, we have some ideas of going back to council goals. That's always a good guidepost of if we have additional funds, let's try to go a little further with the goals that we have.
Yeah.
Main goal being housing, right? Housing and transportation always sort of rise to the top. So those are, that's kind of the why behind our staff generated list. You could have other ideas that you have, and we don't have to come up with the ideas right now. It's just to kind of plant some seeds, and then we'll come back in September and hopefully have better
And
information.
we feel like OHCS is we're gonna get some word on this over the summer, or?
We anticipate, what we
hoping?
have heard from OHCS is that there will be contracts put in place for the new fiscal year. We won't have the same gap we had last year. If you remember, they didn't fund anything, so the city just picked it up for the first 3 months. We believe the money is going to come through MAC. And they did put forth directly to the shelters about a 50% funding allocation for the 3 months. So we had a patch, it didn't come through us, went directly to the shelters to get us through this fiscal year. And then, of course, the Franklin Avenue shelter will be bringing this on the 20th, received full funding of 1.45.
Okay.
So that's why we didn't need the county funds at that
It
location.
looks like Mike has
Yeah.
maybe stay up here just for
Okay.
a moment, Amy, in case Mike has a question related to that as well.
Yeah, I have a question and maybe a comment in that. I mean, if for some reason the OHCS money didn't come through, what does $340,000 get us for any one of these shelters?
6 weeks at now.
6 weeks of operations.
Yep.
Okay. And then I guess my comment is that, I think that I would have the same question about any of these other proposals when we consider all this back in September, assuming we have updated information from OHCS. Like, how do that amount of money, how does it make a difference? How much of the budget does it cover for any of these other proposed ideas?
Yeah, and I think is what Kimberly said earlier, it's really important to note is that we have to have funds obligated by December.
Yeah.
What we're looking to do is a lot of what behind the list of items that you saw was not just that they're council goal related, but they're things that could be done fairly quickly in terms of the contract. So we could add funds to funding that we release for affordable housing or for middle income housing. That to do that.
Yeah. And obligated means
Under contract.
everything has to be signed in contracts and all that stuff. It just doesn't have to have left the building yet, but it has to be fully committed and contract signed and stuff.
Yep, exactly.
So you have to make decisions then by about September to make all that happen by December.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
all right, thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. And Josh, can you hear us?
Thanks, Kimberly and Amy.
Yes, I can.
All right, floor is yours, sir.
If we could turn Josh's camera on too.
Excellent. Let me see if I can turn it on. There we are. Hello, and I'll get right to business here and try to share my screen, which I should be able to do, and then give the slideshow view. How's that?
Yep, perfect.
Perfect. Well, I won't recap too much here other than to note that we had a great conversation at a work session a couple of weeks ago with the full council and appreciate your support during that meeting. In the intervening time, we've met with the Youth Action Board from the Youth Housing Development Program that is a HUD grant at COIC. We've met with that includes the young board members and their adult mentors, including Eliza Wilson from JBarJ. And we presented them with this draft topic statement that has received consensus from all of our other partners and also the Youth Action Board. So this is what we would propose to put into both the MOU that we're signing with you and with other municipalities and the county, and that we would also have this front and center on our invitation letter, those 12,000 letters you recall that will be going out to members of the community to ask for participants. So I'll leave this out here now for any questions or comments on this statement.
So Josh said this is just kind of closing the loop from the work session that we had, where I think council was in general support, but wanted a little more information on the scoping of this. Nope, Mike, go ahead.
So that middle phrase there for building community solutions, how does that phrase add value to this question? I'm not sure what it means, and it feels a little bureaucratic to me. And I'm wondering if, how it adds value, or if there was a substantive discussion about that phrase and the need for it.
Great question. I would say there is not a definitive need for it. We took this language from the HUD grant that came in for the Youth Housing Development Project or program, which essentially is word for word building community solutions to prevent and end youth homelessness. But I think in this case, the reason that we put it in was to demonstrate that this is not just going to be recommendations that come to the city or the county, that there may be other entities, including service providers, public libraries, school districts, there may be others involved as well. So it's really looking for holistic community solutions, but I don't believe that necessarily needs to be in there.
Oh, I love it there. I think, and for just the reason that you just stated, I think that's really important, and that this is something that it needs to be a community solution, not just one entity. So I personally think it's great.
I mean, it reads that kind of that bureaucratic, and so the average person in the community, but as long as you guys are really clear with people and, I guess about why it's there, maybe that'll go away. And given that we're trying to attract people who are not in the system, and don't write grants to HUD and don't, that's, we're trying to get away from that, I think is the whole point. So,
yeah.
But anyway, it's my comment.
I appreciate that, Mike. And I think the way we can mitigate that to a certain degree is the invitation letter that we're sending out is very descriptive of the idea of the broader community being involved in solving this problem, that it's not just out there for elected officials or for city or county administrators, that this is something that requires broader input from the entire community. So that will be noted probably in the same paragraph just below this.
I agree with that perspective, and Megan, Councilor Perkins' point that it needs to be a community, and your point that it's community oriented. So
thanks.
My only comment would kind of be from the opposite, thinking that community expands, that putting that in there indicates it's not just City of Bend, but then it also maybe, what about states? What about the federal government? Maybe we're limiting to community solutions in that perspective. And then that might be intentional, is to try and narrow it to a scope over which we have some control versus whatever the state's going to do. So it's just a comment. And it's fine with me in there. I understand that you're matching language, and so that continuity, that consistency makes sense.
Well, and as Josh referred to, and we put in your packet, I just sent you all a link to that, is the draft letter that the Citizen Assembly has out there. So that this is the letter that folks would receive if they've been selected. So you can take a look at that. Maybe there's an opportunity, Josh, to be a little more descriptive and less bureaucratic in the letter, to be more engaging for community members that might look at these words and not really resonate with them.
Yeah, we're working with a number of different organizations providing input there, and that's why that's still a draft. We're working, our last effort will be to, I mean, we're certainly not going to take the approach that we need to simplify for the public. We think we need to respect the level of insight that members of the community will bring into it, but we definitely want to make it accessible language. So that's kind of that'll be our last phase of editing before it goes out in the next couple of weeks.
Any other comments on this? Otherwise, we'll kind of keep moving there. At this point, just looking to make sure that they're tracking with the city. There's nothing being asked of the city at this point other than what's in the MOU, which is a meeting that would come back with those recommendations to city council. So I just want to make sure you're comfortable with this direction.
The plan would be then to add
This to the end.
this language as the draft topic station statement to the MOU, and then to bring the MOU back to council the second meeting in June.
If that's Mary speaking, you're really faint.
Sorry, I just said we'd add this draft topic statement to the MOU, and then that comes back to council the second meeting in June.
So you're good.
Looks good to me. I think we should move forward with that. I'm excited about this, again, as we've talked about in the council meetings, as an example of our efforts to try new and different ways to engage the community. And I think this is obviously on a topic that is, bigger than just the city of Bend, but that's why we're talking about community here. And, seeing what we learn from it and how it goes and how we might be able to continue to use the tool in the future.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you very much. I'm always available to answer any further questions.
Good luck. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is tax incentives discussion as follow-up to May 15th, 2024 City Council work session presented by Jonathan Taylor.
Slow on the uptick today. All right, so this is the first policy work session that Borough has asked council to ask the subcommittee to do policy formation for the potential site-specific concept, to put some guardrails and some direction in place so that we can start soliciting community feedback and have some kind of foundation to work from for a potential August 21st adoption. As I told Councilor Riley yesterday afternoon, we just acquired some software for more data. So we won't be going into too much data today, but Matt and I said we would meet with any of you who wants to go into the data particular, whether that's vacancy rates, affordable units, construction, et cetera. We can do that offline for more like granular focus, but we do have some data in here for the high level arching view of just kind of like where the market's at. So today's agenda, this might be a little bit more, this definitely will probably be longer than the first two, but we're going to do like a brief overview of what site-specific is. We'll have some base conditions that if this policy is to be implemented, that we're going to require any applicant to follow basically state statutes, state laws, land use focus. And then the policy goals, which will be the main, I guess, crux of the discussion today, is one will overview the market data, and then what are your policy objectives that you want staff to consider for formation, and then we can provide you a sample policy framework. So just briefly, we're here today, May 31st, to do the initial policy. And then on Monday, we're going to take the industrial portion to BDAB. And then in July, we'll work with housing to take it to AHAC, and then any others you wish us to solicit feedback from. And then at the end of July, we'll review a draft with this subcommittee, make some necessary changes. And then the first meeting of August, Borough will get a chance to have a broader discussion on the draft policy with the August 21st adoption date. So real quick, what is it? At a very high level, this is just a single site tax increment financing district, or a mini TIF, or a mini urban renewal agency. The difference between this and a larger district, I want to be very clear, is usually you'll have broad public input for a plan adoption, i.e. the core area report. In that report, you'll have the general broad objectives that you want to see the area look like, be, and feel in the next 30 years. This particular approach is we have an idea of what the project is, i.e. affordable or more affordable housing. We're kind of chicken and the egg syndrome. We're going to put a policy to match what you guys want. So it's kind of just flipping the script of how we adopt an urban renewal agency, but it still follows the same process. There will be two objectives that staff will propose: housing affordability and employment development. And then why are we proposing this? We had a staff assessment that we presented last council and borough joint session. And we feel that with everything that we presented at the last meeting, that this will enable the borough to meet the community needs and council goals. It will allow the city to use TIF to provide targeted development for incentives, and then it can be same policy within existing TIF areas. Real quick, to put a visualization, unlike the last time, which was a graph, we got this from Salem. So this is the Oregon example that is based on the concept that we're going to be talking about today. As you can see, it's a 251 unit site that was established as a mini TIF district. The purpose was to provide 15% of units that were affordable. In their option, it was either rent preservation below the state statute requirement, or 80% or less in terms of affordability. They allowed the development to have an option of what they considered affordable, but 15% of those units had to be dedicated to that. It would be a 41-year plan and $21 million in tax rebate. And then the asking rent right now is for $1,200 and their market is $14,000. So they're meeting their need based on the requirements that they've set.
Oh, one property owner?
Yes, ma'am. And they, they're doing what we're doing. They had challenges with existing tax exemptions that was provided by the state. They felt that due to the complexity of MUPTI, due to some of the issues with middle income that they were experiencing, that they wanted to go a different route to provide a little bit more flexibility in what their community was looking to do. So, this is where I'm trying not to get complex on this one because I've been told that I can be, but the financial mechanism of TIF, let's say, for example, using Timber Yards Phase A, which is what we're seeing now. What would happen if there was no MUPTI or urban renewal in existence in Bend? So what we would propose is you would establish the plan in 2024. It would freeze the base on raw land. And then once the C of O construction is completed and a reassessment has occurred, you see a substantial increase in both tax increment and the taxing district's portion. The reason that there's a broader portion is because the total tax rate for Bend is 15.98. Urban renewal only gets 13.2, so 82% of that. So the total tax liability is still there. But the way we would structure it to meet MUPTI is we would just extend the plan by 2 years. That is as high level as I can get without getting complex. But
I'm already.
okay. All right. So take a step back. Every year, this property would get around $750,000. We would rebate about $580,000 per year. But because MUPTI provided $10.7 million in tax rebate for the exemption, in order to meet that, instead of 10 years, it would be 12. So it's a flexible tool to where if you wanted to provide the same financial benefit, you just flex the time. And that's what Salem did. In order to generate 20 million, it was 41 years.
Yeah, I'm still not good.
Sorry. Because the permanent rate of taxes for the city is different than it's on, like our whole tax rate includes bonds, levies, versus the urban renewal rate is only applied to like permanent tax
Okay.
rates. There's a difference in the tax value. So in order to recreate an exemption benefit like MUPD, with this tool, if you wanted to provide that same benefit to the developer of the exemption, you'd have to extend the life for the amount of years that you offer the rebate. So MUPD is a 10-year tool. And in order to create that same benefit for this project, with this program, you'd have to offer a 12-year plan, if that makes sense.
Now,
It's complicated.
Mike's got his hand up.
Thank you, Counselor Campbell. So just so I'm being clear about this, and already said this earlier, Jonathan, but just to make sure I'm clear, so we can continue to use the site-specific TIF in existing TIF areas, correct?
but you have to pick one.
Well,
No.
the way that it would be worked this way, so site-specific would be outside of existing urban renewal areas. We would just make a program for existing urban renewal areas. It would still follow the same policy and process, but it's available.
So it'd be an exemption that follows the exact same set of criteria. Okay, and we'd still be talking about the increment and than the increment being used by the urban renewal area for the other purposes within that urban renewal area, it would go back to the property owner as the incentive.
Correct, and your current core area plan identifies as developer incentives, so the plan already allows it.
Thank you.
So basically, summary, it's a tax credit program for approved entities providing identified affordable housing options and high quality employment opportunities. So the process that we're proposing that a development or a project follows is 3 parts. One, we'll do a site conditions review, which is it has to meet general statute. We'll do a financial review because the purpose of this project or program is to take development ready market rate units to make them more affordable. And then there's going to be a development review, which is where you'll be able to provide input on what the policy objectives you want to see out of this. So staff recommends that you agree with the site policy only because this is base conditions. 1, it has to be located within the city of Bend. It must meet general statute. And we are asking Borough to add an additional policy on what the definition of stagnant and unproductive means. And the reason we're doing this is because we want to provide a little bit more structure in terms of the definition, because general statute for 457 regarding blight is very broad. And we want to convey a more standardized version of what we mean by stagnant and unproductive. So basically, we're just recommending a vacant lot like greenfields, no built structures. Any lot that's underdeveloped, so less than 50% of the property has been approved. And then any property that's underutilized. And if you remember in the last work session, we talked about taking an existing parking lot and converting it into a quadplex. That's what we mean here is like, what's the highest and best use of the property? And in this case, it wouldn't be a parking lot. It would be a multifamily. Anything that increases the value is the recommendation.
Mike has his hand up.
So that the highest and best use, I mean, is that essentially determined by the zoning? Who's determining that and what are underutilized I get, but
That's a good question. So yeah, it would fall under any kind of rezone. So for example, in the core area where you have a change of use that is required, that's a highest and best use, but also anything that's a substantial amount of generation for property value. So it'd be, if you have population growth and you have an existing parking lot that isn't being used and somebody, a quadplex or anything larger, that would be a highest and best use.
okay. I guess I just, that's fine. It just seems a little subjective in some sense. Somebody might think, well, it would be great to have parking there, but I guess you're basically saying the potential on this property is much greater because it could be a a multi-use 4-story building, and right now it's just a flat parking lot, right? It's the difference between those two that's determining that it's not quote at its highest and best use based on the established what could happen there under current rules and zoning.
Correct. But there is an example more recently downtown across from Market of Choice. You had a single unit detached house that's being converted into a quadplex. So it's kind of saying what it was an upscale not upscale, but like up use development that is being utilized.
Mhm.
Yes, highest and best use can be subjective, but it's also allowing the private developer to utilize that property to what they. So if they're taking a parking lot and developing it into a quadplex, that's highest and best use.
And it doesn't subject us to any kind of external challenge on the subjectivity of that definition versus something else from a legal perspective, in terms of neighbors or others or.
Hi, Councilor Riley. Hi, everyone. So I think it generally highest and best use does mean, you know, what is allowed under the zoning, right? We're all talking about allowed uses.
Yeah.
So highest and best use is somewhat of a term of art, but it does mean, you know, is there some more intensive use?
Yeah.
If I'm misstating anything,
You're
Jonathan, but is there some more intensive use for this property allowed under the zoning?
Okay. All right. So that it is kind of falls back to that. Okay, that makes sense to me then. So my other question, just to go back to your previous slide, I'm just curious about this as financial review. Are we still going to be requiring, are you proposing that we're still requiring a third party financial viability review, and that is part of the criteria that has to be met in order for projects to go forward?
Yeah, so Councilor Riley, we'll have that on the next one, and you get to kind of influence what you would like to see on a financial viability, but that will be discussed in the second.
Okay. All right.
So when you say, what was the word you use?
More intensive.
Intensive, that means denser? Is that what, more intensive? Are we saying denser? Okay.
More stories, higher.
Okay.
It seems like that converting to highest and best use could also be the definition for gentrification. When you're talking about, you know, there's a little house there, there's a little duplex there, they're old, they are not the highest and best use for the property, but they are providing affordable living for a couple of people. And, you know, to say that the highest and best use of that property is 3 stories of housing for a dozen people, you know, that to me is kind of, well, that's gentrification. Which I think we're all, you know, worried about. You know, we're very much worried that highest and best just means increasing rents and just comment. Can you solve gentrification for us, John?
Well, maybe when we get through all of these criteria, you'll see, I don't think that's the necessarily, I mean, it really has to be the property owner coming to us saying, we're gonna do this and you're gonna get to review applications. And you know, if you saw that as a threat, I think that you would have that ability to be like, this isn't the right.
Not this one,
Right.
Yeah, versus parking lot.
Right.
Nobody, you know, is living in this parking lot, nobody's making a living from the parking lot. Highest and best in
Yes.
that sense, I think we would all agree.
Yeah.
Is yes, it could be something better than a vacant lot,
Yes.
you know, or a parking lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you know, it's always devil's in the details, Jonathan. Yeah.
And Eric is right. And so legal also wants me to convey that up until staff review, it's not discretionary. Once it comes before you as both borough and city council, it's all discretionary. So.
Thank you.
So staff recommends approval at this time for at least the site policy, which is basically the minimum requirements of what the statute requires us to do.
And that's what it is. Yes.
I guess I'm still a little confused about how this is all these properties are going to be identified, and I mean, I'm the decision tree and how there was a talk of like RFP or something. I guess I'm not understanding the flow
Okay.
of all this.
So we're not Today, we're not going to talk about the administrative formation of how we're going to deploy this. We're just trying to get a base framework so we can solicit community feedback. But to answer your question, Councilor Perkins, what we intend to do, at least at this time with the general idea, is kind of around December, if this gets adopted as a policy, we'll say in January, are there any proposed developments like through an RFP process? We'll give them 3 months and we'll go through some more like processes with part 2 and 3, but then we'll go through the necessary legal and financial reviews. They'll have to have a pre-app summary from the city of Bend regarding the development to make sure it's compliant. And then we'll do a financial analysis to make sure there's enough tax generation, et cetera. And then we'll bring it before Borough as like a work session one time before you get to consider it and ask questions and we can solicit feedback. But to Eric's point, we're not soliciting projects. We'll put it out there like you have a property that you wish to participate in this program that you'd like to use this program for. And then we'll go from there.
So what's the RFP doing again then?
The RFP is basically opening the door to solicit, like, we have a framework to say we're offering, you know, some tax incentives to create more affordable housing as, you know, as a policy, depending your direction here. And we'll see what we get. And those would come before you to, you know, thumb up or thumb down. So you have ultimate decision about whether or not you feel like and then that would be executed through typically a development agreement. So there's more customization that can take place within each project and what they're offering versus, you know, how we might structure a deal.
And anywhere in the city.
Yeah,
That's
anywhere.
can be up to you.
That's what's being
Yes.
proposed.
Yeah.
But I mean, an RFP requires a time. I mean, this is how I understand RFPs. They are announced, they have a time frame, and you have to apply within a certain window. Are you saying that will be the process for this, the use of this tool going forward? We will do regular RFPs, or is it open where a person with a project can just come? Like it's clear, this is how the program works. These are the criteria. If you meet the thresholds, you can come in and start talking to us. Or are we going to do a RFP like opening, closing every year? Like that part I'm not understanding here.
We envision is maybe doing, because we also have to coordinate the other incentives with the taxing districts. So, and just for synergy, we're thinking both the middle income, the ADU, and this program potentially having an RFP to say, give us your projects, do it on an annual basis. And then we can streamline kind of and then we also know that we're not going to be double dipping, right? You can choose one. This is kind of the city's offering of an incentive package. We want to get the projects, then use staff time efficiently to evaluate them, as well as council's time to then ultimately approve or deny. So that's conceptually what we're talking about right now. We haven't figured out the details. What we're really asking for right now from council is just some policy direction. We'll come back to you on all of those sort of administrative or give you some, you know, some of our thinking around that in terms of how we would deploy. But right now we just need to get some direction on the framework that we're going to operate within.
Yeah, I get that part. I'd like to come back at some point and we can maybe it's at a future meeting, but have a discussion about, I mean, one, are we required to have council or borough approve each of these? And if that's what's required under state law, then fine. But if we're not, are we going to have a discussion about why council is having to approve each project and why we can't do something that is a little bit simpler for everybody and have a clear set of criteria? And if they meet the criteria, staff can move forward and maybe there's some boundary set.
Everybody's up.
Yeah.
Mike got everybody standing up.
Got all of our attention.
Well, I got everybody standing and moving around on that one, huh?
So adoption of each of these would be creation of a new TIF district.
Mhm.
On the property or properties that the project is happening on. And that by statute has to happen by planning commission review, borough review, and city council adoption.
Jeez.
Unless
Okay, thank you.
it's just application of this policy as a development incentive within an existing TIF district. So there's two ways to get the incentive. One is to be within an existing TIF district, and this is a development assistance that is offered within that existing TIF district. If you're elsewhere in the city, you would be creating a new TIF district on the site of that development to provide this incentive. And that new creation has to happen by
Got it.
council.
But the other government taxing districts will have approved the policy in general, right? Or no?
No, this
No.
does not. So I want to be clear. This
Oh.
does not require the other taxing districts. The other, the middle income.
Oh, okay,
and
okay,
the
okay, okay,
ADU.
okay, got it.
Creation of a new TIF district requires
confused. Okay.
notification, consult and confer, but adoption is within
Got it.
the decision-making of.
Okay.
And so one other question then for the program version of this site-specific TIF that we use within existing TIFs, such as the BCD, would that also have to come back to council for review?
It would just go to borough.
But is that required under state law?
I mean, it's required based on the dollar amount that's going out the door by borough and city requirements of Eric doesn't have the authority to sign an agreement giving this kind of incentive. That's a dollar amount that's borough or council.
That's a dollar threshold. Okay.
So with a traditional TIF district or urban renewal area like we have, the TIF funding has to stay within the district, and deciding how the money's gonna be spent is council, ultimately borough, ultimately. And we have our committee that helps us make those recommendations. In this case, the new TIF district that is created is owned by a single property owner.
Yes.
And so in a very real sense, it's just a tax abatement program
More or
for
less.
that single property owner,
More or less.
or rebate or
Yes.
something like that, where a single property is gonna be the beneficiary of that TIF savings, of that TIF money.
Yes.
Hmm.
And the same thing within the TIF, existing TIF districts, it's just parcel dedication. That's all it is. So it's the same process. Just keep in mind that it's deployed the same way,
Sure.
inside and outside. Outside will take a standard average of about 3 months to adopt, from plan adoption to implementation. Within the TIF district, maybe 30 days.
Hmm.
So at least at this time, do we agree with the site policy at this time? Which is located in the city of Bend, requirement must be ORS 457, or would you like more definitive definitions on the borough policy that we could come back with? The first two are a little bit of non-negotiables, but the third one, yeah, the third one is up to this committee.
Can you tell me what stagnant means by definition in this case?
So ORS 457, stagnant and unproductive, is non-defined, and we're trying to provide some definition at a borough policy level.
So that's where it says shall mean.
Yes,
Got
but you don't have to include that. And you just want to go with the state statute, that's allowed too. We were just trying to hone in what we're trying to focus on, but that's up to you guys.
Weird, because isn't blight the word used for urban renewal?
Yes,
But for this, it's stagnant and unproductive.
this is one of the definitions of blight.
Oh.
There are 14 definitions in ORS 457 for blight.
Ah,
One of them could be overcrowding. It's very broad.
And one of them can be stagnant and unproductive.
Yes.
And so what we're saying is we're going to follow that one of the 14 and we shall further define it to mean these things.
Yes.
Should have been a lawyer.
I would be okay with this if we made sure to include some form of displacement, gentrification language, because this whole idea, I picture a landlord saying, yeah, great, this is a great,
Right.
and this poor person's been living in this property. And so I think if we include that, I'm okay with it.
So to your point, Counselor Perkins, we are required by state statute to address displacement and
Displacement.
and you'll see that as a policy. So we'll put that in there. Like, even though it's always in a plan document, we can put that up front in a
Like to.
policy. Okay.
Sounds great.
And then, okay, what about whether or not, no, council has to decide because we have to form this new tiny TIF. Can we
Yep.
call them tiny TIFs?
That's fine.
Okay. Tiny TIFs. Merry
That's
Christmas
amazing.
to all.
Amazing.
Okay, so no matter what, this cannot be entirely a staff decision ever because council has to establish the new tiny TIF.
At any point, no matter what we're proposing,
Yeah,
whether it's 50,000
yeah,
all the way up to 10.7, it will always be a borough or a council decision.
okay.
Well,
Okay.
unless we delegated to Eric authority on some different thresholds, right? Because what I thought I heard the answer was the policy currently is that requirement is driven by our own policy, not by state law.
Yeah, the thresholds that I have for like contracting and things that is part of our municipal code.
Mhm.
So
It's not really like a
But-
contract. It's
Sorry, that's but establishing the tips, establishing that's like,
Yeah.
you will see it.
Okay.
But if we implement this program within the core area TIF, we do a similar incentivized program.
Mhm.
Change Eric's level in theory, where Borough can choose whether or not to just authorize Eric to go ahead and execute them at a certain threshold, or Borough can choose to hear every single one. So like you did with the business assistance grants, you could have said, we'll take Kaz's recommendation, Eric, under this threshold, go ahead and assign all those, but we chose to go to the Borough to have you go through and approve them. So
Mhm.
have that discretion at Borough. But to establish everyone
Mhm.
outside of that, you will see it regardless.
And so if
Now we got
we.
Lynn. Sorry, everybody's up today.
Lynn McConnell, Housing Director. I think what I'm hearing is council is saying, whenever we have the ability to make an administrative decision, we would prefer that. And so that is the sort of framing we can use in implementing this, if that's what you all are saying. That's the piece I wanted to capture. And then staff, when we find that opportunity, if those exist, we will bring back an administrative level decision when we can.
My suggestion is we at least look at that option where it is applicable under state law, given the various rules that apply depending on where we're talking about. I think that the issue is we need to set some boundaries on that. Maybe there's some upper limit in terms of number of total project over some time frame or whatever, or some kind of periodic review that we look at the outcomes that we set and the goals we were trying to achieve and how are we making progress against those, and review that periodically. But I think, perhaps some of what we've learned with some of the controversy in past on some of these things is that it seems like maybe we're a bit outside the box and the norm, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But in terms of how this is approached in other communities, there's much more of this stuff is pretty administrative. Like, this is the goal, this is the outcome. If you meet the criteria, you get to move forward. Maybe this boundary thing is something I'm suggesting we look at that's a little bit different than other jurisdictions or communities. But I'm trying to simplify stuff here and try, get things moving, right? So, and removing obstacles where we can. So I'd like to at least look at that option where we have the ability to pursue it.
Okay. And after August 21st, we're going to spend the next 5 months developing the administrative policy, and borough and council will see that, correct, Eric? They'll see the administrative policy before we launch.
Generally, what we'll do is we'll make you aware of it. And I think that given how complicated this is, I think it's really
Yeah.
how administratively it would work. So I have no problem in sharing that with
Okay.
you. Yeah.
So the next policy question, I'm going to say, I'm not going to recommend approve. We're going to talk about it. The minimum investment that we're going to require of any site is 500,000. And the reason we're proposing that is that this is where we can generate the bare minimum of tax increment that we can provide. So it's just kind of a base threshold that most communities have implemented just to make sure that, because we've tried to run the numbers for an ADU. There's no substantial tax generation for that for TIF. So The bare minimum that we could do is 500,000. So we're just kind of setting that threshold. That way it also applies to smaller developers that may just want to substantially improve their property, that maybe they're a quadplex that need a massive overhaul and they're able to invest 500,000 and they can take advantage of this program. The second one is financial viability and impact. And what we're proposing is that we're not trying to solve any kind of cost gap with the development. And the reason being is we want to make sure that these are development ready, that they're just kind of like, do we pull the trigger or do we not? And if we do, can the city partner with this developer to provide more affordable units? What we've learned through the review of those pro formas, that when you have a cost gap, which is like, let's say you're missing 10% of your funding, it's going to be hard for them anyway to provide more affordable units because we know that the market just can't handle naturally occurring affordability. So at this time, we're not proposing to try to solve any financial challenges with the development.
Other than, but for this tax abatement or rebate program that allows them to meet some of these affordable unit, when we will get to what the definition of that is later, but whatever criteria that we've set.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So they have to be able to do the project without an incentive.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Okay.
what we're trying to accomplish at this time, this is not like a capital A affordability tool. This is like, if we can work with this developer to get 15% of those units at 90% AMI, that's what we're trying to accomplish, because we're ending up lowering the overall rent while targeting a specific data set. We like for the quadplex example, we worked with the pro forma, which was going to charge an average rent of about $2,300. That's kind of typical for that size of development. Running the numbers over a 10-year period, we're able to get one of those units down to 60% AMI if they got this program, like just if they got a 10-year tax abatement. Because the purpose of the abatement savings the developer gets should be passed on to the identified percent of renters that you're trying to increase affordability. As Councilor Riley said, this is but for, so you only get this development incentive if you provide an identified level of affordability that this subcommittee gets to determine.
Now I just wonder if I understand urban renewal and financing at all ever. So in a big tip in the, so back to our urban renewal area. The new projects, they're paying their taxes. They're paying the new increments.
Yes.
It's just not going to all of the taxing districts. That money goes into a savings account, and then we can use that money within the district on whatever projects. In our case, we have a committee and borough that decides we're going to use the money, for example, to improve 2nd Street.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
In this case, it's just straight up, they're not paying the increment. And so.
No, they'll always pay.
Right. So who gets the money? How does it help anybody?
So okay, great question.
Okay. Good question.
On October 15th, everyone gets their tax bill. They pay early, they get a 3% discount.
Okay.
Usually urban renewal will get the money in January, right?
Okay.
For every parcel that's in an urban renewal. We look at that parcel and we pull their tax bill. We credit them back the 82%. So they'll still pay, but we credit back the 82%. So basically the borough's portion. They still have to pay the total tax. So let's say they pay $1.
Pay them back.
We'll pay them back 82 cents once they certify that they're still providing 15% affordable units. That's where it gets administratively easier. It's just this weird policy formation that seems a little bit more complicated.
So the money's still going into the savings account you described, Barb. Counselor Campbell, but instead of it being used, say, for Second Street, it's being used to incentivize this one particular development to deliver some units of that meet certain affordability criteria. So the use of the funds is different.
Right? So,
But
this is, I'm sorry.
No, I
so
just
this
got all confused again.
is not a program to improve an area. Well, you know, I don't know if it's fair for me to say that. Interesting.
So, okay, so I want to build a fourplex. Whatever we call it. I have to have all of the money to build that fourplex, but then I'm going to get 82 cents to $1 back to help me with the money that I was supposed to already have.
So no.
That's
So
where
let's,
I'm losing you.
so usually, okay,
Or Lynn, or I don't know, whoever.
you're building a quadplex and you have all the money.
Yeah.
You've already got your bank loan, all that stuff.
Yeah.
The bank and you have already determined your market rate rent, which is
Okay.
probably going to be $2,300.
Okay.
The tax that you pay every
Oh,
year
gotcha.
is operating income that you're factored into your pro forma. It's a required expense. If we say you get back 82 cents,
Yep.
then they're able to dial the rent
Okay,
down to the 60%.
that makes sense. Thank you. You're killing us today, Jonathan. I don't know. We're just struggling.
Picture perspective, I think, and I hope it's okay that I'm just gonna mention the elephant in the room here, which is risk, right?
Yeah.
And who's making this decision about which incentive should go to development? You, as city council and as borough, have a certain role, which is not always shared by some of our public sector partners. This allows for housing development to continue in the way that you have designated through TIF plans, through your council goals, and through other mechanisms. And we consult with districts, so they have a say. But ultimately, it is the council and borough's decision at times. So that, I think the risk analysis is a huge piece of why this tool is being presented to you after some of the discussions we've had over this year. So I hope it's okay that I went there, but that might be the.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And if I may, Eric and I could sit down with each of you and just walk through some Excel spreadsheets offline so you can kind of get a better understanding of the financing mechanism. It sounds complicated, and I'm sorry if I continue to make it complicated, but it's money in that they pay. You participate in compliance with the program, you get 82% back.
Compliance in the program is
What you
affordable
decide,
housing.
what you decide, yes.
Got it.
And then like,
So, you know, I'm starting to see why we have been seeing this program as an alternative to MUPD specifically. This, and it's really not even this, we want to do urban renewal in a different way. We want to incentivize affordable housing in a different way. And what, you know, I have thought about as big picture urban renewal, where all of that TIF money is going into a pot and we're able to improve an entire part of town, an entire area. That, you know, this just has a different goal.
yes.
This does not have the goal of improving an area of town. It's just not that. This provides affordable just housing in general, when there was not any before. You know, it gets properties up to that highest and in one at a time, up to highest and best use.
Yes.
Interesting. Thank you.
And it also reduces the impact to your general fund and to our overlapping taxing districts, because unlike MUPD, it was a complete exemption on everything. This one, there's still the bonds and levies that are unaffected. There's the frozen base.
That's why the picture is different. That's why there's yellow in the middle of green.
Yes.
Instead of only green on the bottom. Allison is laughing.
It's all
Right?
coming
She
clear,
knows
like
I'm
we're all,
all
we've worked
I'm all
through it.
about pictures.
Like a-
Yeah, right.
I did have-
It's a therapy session. We're all working through it. Like,
Okay.
I did have 44 slides originally, and it might have made more sense then, but no.
Okay.
So right now I'm asking, can you approve the baseline policy objective of the financials, and we can come back with more definitive
Yeah.
like requirements?
Yeah.
now that it makes sense.
All right.
Yes, I think that just to make the point that we are not requiring proof of quote, I mean, we have to see that the project is viable as it is, right? But we're not filling a gap. That's not the target, which was more of what was happening with MUPTI.
Yes.
Yeah.
And another thing, that this cannot occur after construction starts,
Mhm.
previous to that, only because that's how.
Thank you.
Yes. And the last brief base policy question that we'd like to ask before the main policy objectives is, we want a certificate of occupancy within 2 years of plan establishment, which means, you know, you approve the plan in 2024, we'd like to see the C of O by 2028. And the reason being is we don't want to freeze land that isn't moving to complete council's goals. We don't want to take it off the tax rolls. And the second request is to have just a general pre-app summary of the development, because, you know, development times can be kind of off in terms of over the 2 years. We just want to make sure that we're not freezing property and promoting a plan that doesn't conform to the Bend Development Code. So it's a land use decision. We're trying to protect everyone, both the developer and borough.
We're trying to find that spot in between. They have already started construction.
Yes.
And we're not even sure if they're gonna be able to start construction.
Yes.
Right? We want to be certain enough this project is going to happen. It conforms with all of our codes and rules.
Mhm.
They have enough money. It's a $500,000 they themselves. But they haven't already started so that people think we're giving away money for free.
And secondly, what we intend to do on a staff level is during the frozen base period, we will elect not to collect the tax increment. So it continues to go to the taxing districts. So we're not trying to, we're trying to be fair. So remember, you freeze the base.
Yeah.
We take that money, right? And then the baseline, so $100, you get that $100, but every year it grows by 3%.
Right.
We're going to continue to give that back to the general fund and the taxing districts until C of O. Unlike a normal urban renewal district, because you're trying to build capacity to do big projects, you keep all that increment. Because we're only targeting affordable housing or employment. We want the taxing districts to retain that increment until the C of O.
3% increment.
Yes, yes.
Interesting. Okay. I think yes.
Oh, Mike, go ahead.
On that point number one on this slide, within 2 years. So just to make sure I'm clear, this is proposing the time at which the TIF plan is adopted for this particular site. Then 2 years from then, they have to have a certificate of occupancy.
Yes, sir.
So what, I mean, is there going to be any kind of flexibility for some kind of contingency if something happens, you know, that extends it for 3 to 6 months or something like that? It seems like we need to provide some kind of flexibility.
Yeah, and we can bring that to the administrative policy formation, like maybe a year extension if extenuating circumstances happen. Just want to make sure that we want to convey, not trying to freeze land outright.
Right.
So we're going to talk about the main policy objectives. So the main objective that staff kind of currently assumes is that you want to incentivize more affordable unit production and or preservation. And if that is still the case, we'll move into the kind of the data overview, but eventually we're going to ask you what are additional policy objectives of the site-specific concept that you'd at least like staff to consider. So before we get that, I'll briefly go over the local data. So this is our current data of our cost burden efforts for a 1 to a 4 person household. If you look, anybody that makes 90% or less in Bend is going to be cost burden by renting a 1 studio apartment for a 1 person.
9% of what?
90% of the AMI.
Thank
So
you.
$66,000.
Got it.
So a 2 person household making less than 75 will be cost burden. 85,000 for a 3 person, and then $115,000 for a 4 person will be cost burden. But if you look, the average for a 1 person household is $54,000. So the market is not meeting the need for a 1 person household is basically what I'm getting at. And the market is barely meeting the need for the 4 person household. Single individuals are the fastest growing household in Bend, 31%. And like I was saying, if you don't make $75,000, you will be cost burdened when renting. The third 3-person household is the second fastest growing household at 8%. And if you don't make $85,000 or more, you will be cost burdened to rent. So we want to kind of keep that in mind of where you may end up wanting to establish your AMI goals, 60 to 100s, 70 to 110. So basically knowing this broad overview of data of, our 1-person households and our 4-person households are almost cost burden or are cost burden. What percent or number of units per development should our policy target for affordability? And we're not trying to define what affordable is yet. We're saying if a development comes in, what percentage of those units would you like to see as affordable? Like I showed you earlier, Salem had the 15% requirement for their site specific. Mupti had a 10% requirement for 60%. So it's kind of like, where do you see an aspirational goal on percent of units per development that are affordable?
Why can't we go higher than that? Mupti, the problem we had with Mupti, right, it was so low. The 10% was,
I think it depends on how affordable to whom. 20% of units affordable to 30% or something is far more difficult to achieve than if they're affordable to 80, obviously, right? So I think it depends on that. What are we defining as affordable? Are we, what percentage of the income are we saying?
So for example, with the quadplex, we got 1 unit 60%, but if we had structured it differently, you could have gotten 2 units at 90%. The reason it's harder for a larger percentage of affordable units is it doesn't pencil for the operating income for the developer. It's
even
why
lowercase a.
lowercase a,
not
yeah.
pencil. Okay.
Yeah. So if you're wanting,
Lynn's coming
Matt's
up.
got it. Move up.
I think you just have to remember there's a finite amount of increment that's generated, whether it's affordable unit or a market rate development. That doesn't impact property tax. So as Jonathan's doing his modeling, kind of seeing if you ask anything more than a quarter or a fifth of the units, you start negatively impacting the financial performance of the development, therefore leading to them not being viable to actually develop it. So he's alluded to the fact is, if we're trying to motivate housing, how do we kind of do this sort of inclusionary zoning approach to it, using incentives as a tool to kind of get that 20-25% of the units at least at some AMI level? And his second part of the question there is, do you cap it at 100% AMI, or do you be more specific and say we want 60 to 80% AMI? Also remember, if they want all their units at 100 to 120% AMI, we have that program through the middle income as well. So we're trying to balance, how do we make them different enough, but also similar enough to kind of achieve the different goals that work within a development performance.
Mike's hands up.
So, what are we seeing in other communities in terms of actual experience with some of these percentages? Like, are there ones that have been, what the record or the history would suggest is the percentage targets were set too high and they just didn't get really anybody using the program? And were there some where that were like 5 or 10% and there tons of people came in? Is there anything in the data or experience anywhere that says anything about that? And then, maybe I'm kind of getting at the next part of this question is the AMI target. Is there something that says, well, these tools are generally not producing units that are when they start talking about below certain thresholds? Like, is this tool best used for certain parts of the housing continuum?
it's all depending on the financial analysis. And that's where it gets a little complicated in terms of like the target number of units per policy. For example, this is a new tool that the communities are looking at in Oregon. So we would be the second one that deploys it this way. Salem has 2 requirements. 15% of the units have to be affordable, but they allow the developer to determine what affordable is. So for example, 80% AMI or less, or market rate rent preservation that's below the statutory limit. So for example, no more than 2% of rent growth per year. They're just trying to see what they are able to get in the market. This isn't, like, as Lynn said, this isn't a capital A affordability tool. This is a tool to use some dials to get as much affordability as we can per site. So the way that I was looking at it through earlier this year is what would happen if we wanted 60% AMI? That's a target. Have to extend that plan for 10 years and provide that tax rebate. That's where it's like malleable and adaptable. That's why we're proposing this, because if you see that the need is 80% for a 1-bedroom, we can structure the plan document and the amount to achieve that. That's what Salem did. 41 years for $20 million. They just use their different levels to achieve your goals. It's like the administrative dialing, like we're driving, we want to go faster, we want to go farther. You allow staff to do that. We turn the dials to achieve that goal based on what you see fit.
It seems like in a perfect world, the amount of money that, you know, it would just be, that's how many dollars come off of the rent. However much money they get, we want rent to be dropped by that amount. We don't want that money going into your bank account in order to increase your profits.
But that's where the certification per year comes in. But there's so much more that goes into rent factorization. You've got construction, you've got administrative costs, you've got long-term costs, you got building upkeep. I mean, and they have to make a profit too, which is usually about 5%. But this, like you said, this tool isn't to increase profits. This is, if you participate in this program, we want to see a direct cost of what we can get for affordable. Right. And what I'm asking is, like, maybe we should go with policy question 5 first. What would the subcommittee like exploring specific targets for unit sizes and respective AMIs? Because the way that we have it set up in most communities is 80% AMI or less for a family of 4. So what we could propose is, if you build studio apartments, we would like, if you want to qualify any of those studio apartments, they have to be below 80% or 100% AMI. Instead of allowing the developer to say, well, it's more cost effective if we use the 15% to build the 2-bedroom and we can kind of do what we want with that. It's just up to the subcommittee.
This subcommittee?
Well, we're recommending to the council, right? Yeah.
Descriptive.
Okay.
Personally. But...
Yeah, I just want to know that the money's going to reduce rents.
Yeah.
You know?
I also get worried about having long lists of options, because I think one of the things we saw with Mupti, it's like, that one's a little bit easier for us to do. So let's do that one, you know, so I want to make sure it's very tight. What we do, if we do have a list of more than, you know, one thing.
So what we intend to do, if we have a baseline policy, is kind of shop it out to, like, our community groups and also some developers to see if this is feasible, and actually sit down with some financial modeling of. So I guess the question would be, what percent or number of units per development would you like to see as affordable then? Like, what's a goal that you would like us to explore?
You know how I love to overcomplicate, Jonathan.
Yeah.
I would like some of each size.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
You know, I don't want the only affordable apartments in town to be studios, or 3 bedrooms for that matter. And, you know, I might say it's not just 10%, but it's 10% of every size unit you're offering. If this is one of these big that has them all, well, then at least one of every, if you've got a few 3 bedrooms, one of them needs to be affordable. 10% of all the 2 bedrooms, 10% of the 1 bedrooms, 10% of studios.
But then if they build a bunch of studios.
Right, then is it
then
only
they only have to do 10% of,
right,
of that. I worry about.
No, that's exactly. So how does that calculate if the building is all something?
I mean, I feel like I would trust the developer to read the market and know
Which types?
what types of, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, similar with parking, you know, they know, they would know
Right.
better than, so I would be comfortable not having, but I understand what you're saying.
Right, no, I don't want to tell them which ones to build. I just want all of the apartments to be affordable.
Yeah.
Or-
I just want that.
That's your- Jonathan, can you make that happen? Please.
One of the trade-offs seems to me, it might be like if we set the percent of units too high, that we may get fewer projects. And so if we keep it a little, I mean, not at the low end, but say 20, 15 or 20%, then maybe we're going to get more total number of projects happening. You know, obviously at different scales and different sizes, because we're, you know, you could do this on a smaller scale, say a quadplex or something, or you could do something bigger. But it does, I'm wondering about if the staff have any suggestions on how we tie it back to some of these household sizes that have the fastest growth rates in Bend. You know, and what that means in terms of, you know, rents that are targeting those AMI percentages.
So to Councilor Riley's point, I guess we could come back with a couple of options of here is what we could get if it's a flat 15%. Here's if it's maybe an option A and B of policy 5, and then to Councilor Riley's point, another option. So maybe have 3 or 4 options, not for a developer to pick and choose from, but
No, for, yeah.
great. And we do have data now that will actually answer some of your questions, Councilor Riley, about like what's the growth rate, what's the market need for 1 bedroom, what's being built for 1 bedrooms, et cetera. So we can sit down and talk about those more specifically when we have these options, but staff can come back with maybe 3 or 4 options that you can consider in July.
Because that's a question I asked via email was how does this come, you know, what is the sort of targeted need in the community relative to existing housing stock, and to what extent is it being delivered by the market? Which portions are or aren't? Knowing that capital A affordable housing at the lower end of the spectrum is probably not what we're going to get built with this tool, but you know, how could it help us? How could these incentives perhaps increase production in some of those places where we're not meeting the need that we have?
Okay.
The market on its own is not meeting the need.
Yeah, no, Mike, I think you're right. And I think that's, you know, better than what I was saying, which is a percentage of every of the sizes that might not make sense. You know, you are telling us that the data is single person households are actually the largest percent increase, did you say? And, you know, with that in mind, no, maybe we are just incentivizing 1 bedroom and studios. I guess what I'm worried about is specifically studios. Making a studio affordable means less money versus, so, you know, a developer just to be able to have the affordable ones could say, okay, well, I'm going to squeeze in 4 more studios. Those are going to be what's affordable, while all the 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms are at the very top of market. Does that make sense? It seems like there would be a way in the development to kind of change where you're getting what you're building for the incentive instead of building what we need for the market. So yeah, I would like to see that incentive tied to what the market needs as well as just what are they building, what percentage of what they happen to be building.
Just a brief overview of, since we were talking about studios, the studio vacancy rate for Bend is 4%. You want an 8% vacancy rate. So the demand.
This great for everything for them. We don't have 8 for anything, do we?
Right now.
Do we?
Say what?
There's actually an article
Or Central Oregon Daily did a piece on it.
And so there's only 40 vacant units for studios in the city of Bend right now. There are 349 under construction at the moment. But I think to your point is the need is there for at least studios and how do you use, so we'll come back with some options on policy question 4 and 5 and have you consider that at the next subcommittee meeting.
Great, thank you.
And then the last main policy question today is, in addition to providing more affordable housing options, are there other priorities or community benefits that staff should consider for this policy? And based on what I've heard today, I've already put the staff recommendation in here is if the goal is to provide affordable housing or more affordable housing options, that we should limit additions of community benefits or objectives. I mean, I think maybe, for example, energy efficient appliances in all units should be kind of a standard.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know, something that we could include is like xeriscaping, because you have the program for the city that's removing lawns and replacing it with high desert compatible uses and stuff. So just think about those. If you've got some today that you'd like for staff to consider, but
I want those linked to affordable living. So energy efficient appliances might cost you a little more upfront, but it's going to mean every year that family that is having trouble, they're at paying, 50% of their income. They are saving money on energy. And then even the same for that landscaping, as long as we're thinking about it in terms of saving money by this type of landscaping, because you don't have to pay for water versus, the goal we in general have of saving water because we live in the desert, regardless of what the cost.
Okay.
Those are separate reasons to want xeriscaping. I want us to have it linked to this makes it more affordable for that family, just like lowering their rent does. Okay.
And I think what we were trying to get at is, and I think I've heard from all three of you today, is if we're going to deploy this tool to make it as simple and administratively easy as possible, and we just want to provide a comparison of what MUPTI required and what, Salem is currently doing.
Yes.
And to that point, I think once we have those three options set in July, we'll have a better understanding of like a broader community input. But for now, what I would say is, at least in terms of policy question 4 and 5, is it okay with this subcommittee if staff also solicits some community feedback on some of those four options?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
I do have a question.
Mike's got his hand up.
Comment, and that is just, I would agree with what Councilor Campbell said about if we're going to add anything else on, we ought to kind of do it within the lens of affordability. And it does seem to me that energy use is a big part of that. And I don't know if there is any way that is, again, I do think the simplicity of all this is really important. So it may be that energy efficient appliances is the most simple thing to add. But looking at energy use in the building overall really does contribute to affordability issues, especially in light of all our different utilities going up multiple times over the last couple of years and continuing to go up, whether it's natural gas or electricity. So that seems like it contributes directly to affordable living in the community. And I think we should at least have an option to look at when you come back to us, and it would be good to get feedback as well on that.
Agreed.
So basically, what staff will propose and move forward with is 4 and 5. We will come up with options that will have the community consider. I think some of the groups that I am presenting to over the next several weeks, you are members of those groups, so I'll be able to get feedback from them. But then also just the site and financial and program, that's kind of where we're starting at. We'll solicit feedback from identified community groups. There is work going to be continuing going on over the next several years, in addition just to having market data. Growth management will be doing their housing capacity analysis, which will really drive in and have state definitive numbers of what will be needed over the next 20 years, as well as for the economic development portion of it, which is the EOA. I know we didn't get to this today, but we don't really have a lot of data yet because Ben and his team are working to identify industry clusters through their industry cluster analysis. And so what that is the top 5 employers or top 5 industries that are growing in Bend that provide high quality living wages. And so our recommendation today is once those have been identified, that we use this tool not only for housing, but to promote quality and high employment. Because affordability is just as important, but in order to have more affordable units, we need people making more affordable wage jobs. So
I like the idea of tossing it to BDEB to do a little work on it before it comes back to us too, if
Me
you
too,
will.
because homes are where jobs go to sleep.
And I think that the question I would ask, or just ask that we think about and maybe have some answers and discussions about, and is to what extent are the high quality jobs for people that are already in our community versus attracting new people to the community? Not that we shouldn't be attracting new people, but just how does it line up with the current workforce that we have in our community today? And it seems important for us to think about that somehow.
okay.
I know that we're kind of over time, and that's in part because it took so long to get the meeting going, and I'm not sure how much more you had here, Jonathan. I had a couple other questions that haven't sort of come up directly yet.
Okay, and we're good. We have until 1:30, so you're good, Mike.
So should I launch in now, or do you have more presentation here, Jonathan?
I just basically just
Okay.
recapping the timeline. We'll be going to BDAB on Monday. Just to kind of, Allie's got some questions she'd like to ask based on some policy recommendations. The goal is now what we've heard today is keep it simple for the deployment of this tool. I think that's the big takeaway. But then we'll be meeting with AHAC in July, and then probably the chamber and any other community members. If you have identified community members that you think of over the next several weeks, just let me know and we can reach out to them. And then under Eric's direction with the mayor, we'll be having conversations with the taxing districts in addition to not only this tool, but the other tools that housing is proposing on behalf of the city council. So Councilor Riley, I think I'm ready when you are.
So, I mean, one comment on this adoption timeline are we going to be asking HREC to give us any feedback input on any of this? It seems like this is partly about, part of their charge around how we're engaging, serving parts of the community that might have been underserved in the past.
I think this is so technical. I mean, I think they're more interested in general affordability. I don't think, this is sort of something that's in their work plan right now to kind of get into the technical nitty gritty on tax incentive increment financing. That's just my thought. We were trying to get away also from presentations to HREC just to kind of check a box too. So it'd have to be something that they would really just be.
I might suggest, when we have our quarterly updates, maybe in July, Jonathan, we can do a quick sketch of this, and then, because we invite our boards, committees, and commissions to kind of track with us on projects as a first step.
Yeah. And they're really leaning into the impediments to fair housing work. So they're going to be working with AHAC on that. So.
Okay, but just to be clear, I'm not trying to suggest this is to check a box. I'm suggesting that, is it something they should be providing any kind of input on or not, if that's their purpose.
Given how technical this is, I think we should be very focused about what kind of input we want, because staff time resource, it would be a lot to take all of our
Sure.
through all the technical. It took us a while, just even with the council, to get us
Sure.
to a place where we can kind of digest this.
Okay. So one question I have is just related to administrative cost burden, and that's how are we paying for it? I'm assuming we're going to have some kind of mechanism like in Salem where if I understood it right, they retain a portion of the money that would go back, the rebate, in order to help fund the program. Is that envisioned here? Because it does seem relatively intensive to have to go through this with every single project.
Yeah, so we'll kind of explore some percentage options that doesn't affect the affordability that you're trying to accomplish.
Mhm.
Two, Salem does require that any person who applies for this plan pays for the plan formation and the legal study that they have to conduct for this plan. So that's about $6,000. That reduces our administrative burden cost, but it also provides a surety that they're serious to go forward with this project.
Mhm. Okay. And then when in both these tools, or I guess both uses of the tool for employment and jobs versus or housing, the verification process, I mean, there's some sort of annual verification process that they've met either the units and the income levels that have been targeted, and or like the percentage of units or income levels, and or the jobs that are laid out in the plan right before they get the rebate. Is that how it works?
Yes.
Okay, so it has to be verified annually, or yeah. And then my other question, I guess, is related to how does this help us achieve some of the other policy goals, and that we have, you know, either our own goals and or those that are state requirements, and some of which are the same or overlapping, very similar. Things like climate densification, vehicle mile travel reduction, and how that relates to climate friendly areas, complete communities. I mean, what, you know, are we going to end up with stuff that's just one-offs out on the edge of the community? Like, is there something we should be doing related to thinking about that? And once we establish climate friendly areas, so this is kind of a related question. If I'm understanding all this correctly, in some of those climate friendly areas, the sort of big picture, as you're referring to it, Councilor Campbell, urban renewal stuff, we could still create urban renewal districts in those areas, and then this tool could be used in the policy manner the same way it's being used in the Bend Central District, the way we're envisioning using it in the Bend Central District, right? So we could do the same thing in future urban renewal districts.
Yes, sir. And I've also been working with Brian with growth management of trying to identify kind of incentive land banking opportunities, of not necessarily creating these miniature TIF districts where you think your CFAs may going to go, because you might need to have a broader discussion about area impact. So we'll come up with some ideas about areas of preserving that CFA attempts for climate friendly action areas, because we don't, at least in my current estimation, I don't want to create a single use site where you might have an urban renewal area in the future. Like, yeah.
Are you saying you'd preclude? We'd have like preclude some parts of town to use this tool for a period of time?
We could have that discussion in July. We could come up with like some options of, if you know that the CFAs are going to move quicker, we could say we have another tool that we're going to deploy in this area. It's balancing current need of affordability, but also the long-term goals of what council has in other areas.
Mm-hmm. What about this idea of this stuff ending up with one-offs sort of out on the edge of town, and how it does or doesn't complete, complement or help us achieve some of our other goals around complete communities and
I guess thinking off the top of my head, there could be an option of the awarded projects, 80% have to be within a certain geographical area. That way you're not subsidizing so much development that's on the periphery of town. I think what we heard, though, where I'm trying to balance and thread the needle carefully, is during the initial strategic assessment of the existing incentives, we heard from several community members that certain areas of the city are bearing the burden of development. And so I don't want to constantly throw development within like a geographical 1 mile area, and that's where it's all occurring. The goal was to have the entire city be a fielding ground for affordability. But we can get together, or we can come up with some ideas of consideration of how to balance travel time, mobility, complete communities, while also ensuring that we're not saddling one specific parcel or area with all the development.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, Mike, I think we're already somewhat protected just by the nature of the comp plan designations and zonings that are already set in place in the city that are intended to help us create complete communities. And some of the complete communities that we're envisioning are on the edges of town, and that's kind of where we identified that needed to happen. So I think we have a different tool to help address that, and any project that utilizes this incentive is going to need to comply with comp plan and zoning. And so we're already sort of, there's opportunities to enhance our zoning to support our complete community goals, but that should kind of be done through that comprehensive plan and zoning perspective. And right now our zoning is set in place that already supports some of those goals. But I don't know necessarily if we need to like modify this tool to necessarily address that, if that makes sense. I think it's a good question.
I mean, because for example, this kind of tool could be used or in say future proposals and specific projects in Stevens Road Tract or Stevens Ranch, right? For example.
Once they were annexed into the city.
Correct. At the point where development can move forward, but or in the southeast part of town, southeast area.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the intent there is that we've already kind of created the zoning to allow for complete communities in that area. And this could be a tool to help incentivize that development to take place that would support those complete community goals.
Yeah, I just wouldn't want anything to be in here that sort of is counter to any of those other goals. But I understand what you're saying, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think you just kind of like pinged another thought. Like one of the areas that we're really struggling with achieving some of our complete community goals is that we're seeing financial barriers to some of the commercial spaces being developed. So we're, always residential is going to lead before commercial spaces, but like the Easton master plan area and the Petrosa master plan area are having a hard time finding commercial tenants. So maybe we can work with BDAB in evaluating whether that's an area where we'd like to see this tool potentially fill a gap in some of our complete community goals.
Yeah, and that to some extent, maybe that Petrosa is sort of an example. I mean, to what extent is that going to meet some of these sector-based job requirements? But it's also something we want to see happen, that kind of commercial development, to make those developments successful. And it is going to create new jobs, right? But is it going to meet the sector-based stuff? I mean, that's kind of getting at that question I was asking earlier. I mean, if we're too narrow on that job definition, is it not then going to be applicable, for example, in Petrosa?
Yeah, I think that's some of the questions we want to dive in with BDAB. So it's helpful to kind of get some of this council input to help guide that discussion. I think that's a really good area to focus in on. And I think, sorry, one more addition. Like right now, the only existing economic development incentive tool we have is the enterprise zone, which is really traded sector. It's very narrow. And so I think because this tool is more flexible, we can evaluate some more of those economic development goals that we maybe want to support as a community. Like how do we actually see some of these complete communities be realized? So it has that flexibility to do that. And I think we can evaluate it a little bit more broadly than just the E-zone policy.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, and just in summary, this is kind of the situation, I think, where we need to be exploring as a city, is we have these great visions with our comp plan and complete communities and all, of more affordable housing, but we've got to be active partners in making that happen. And so what we're trying to do is provide you with some tools to be able to have that engagement with our private development community, but to make sure that we're doing it very cautiously. And we feel like these are putting us down this path will allow us, I think a little bit more responsiveness to some of the concerns that we heard with the earlier tools of MUFTI and others, to be able to put a more of a correlation behind your objectives, particularly of affordable housing and a whole scale of projects too, not just large multifamily, but much more scalable projects. So Thank you for the input today and
Could I just be a squeaky wheel
Sure.
on our needing our own staff person who is looking at the market, particularly the rental market,
no.
what's available, what are prices? I think Counselor Perkins is right. Developers know better than we do. Well, right now they know better than we do because we don't know much at all. And when it comes to what kind of an apartment to build in Bend, Oregon right now, I think the answer is anything at all. It will be rented. You will be able to get pretty much however much money you want for it.
Right.
And, it's not so much like parking that they're happy to retool. They want what they can get the most for. And if that's all 3-bedroom apartments, then they're more likely to build all 3. So anyway,
No,
squeaky wheel.
It's a good squeaky wheel, and as Jonathan mentioned, we've got access to some data. It's not as comprehensive as we'd like, and
Yeah.
we also talked about this with the impediments to for housing.
Mhm.
There's just a lack of data, so I really envision the next, as we build towards our council goals, to have a lot more of an emphasis around the need for data, and potentially that's a great opportunity to partner with another organization outside the city to get. And also some other efficiencies that could happen within the market to, like, for example, consolidate rental applications, right? So instead of somebody going to all the different properties, it's a one-stop shop. There's lots of examples out there. But I think we need to be a player to catalyze. We've been talking about it for a long time to get access to more real-time data to help make decisions, and it's a little bit clunky right now.
Sure.
So I think that's a good
Squeaky
squeak.
wheel.
Yep.
Yep, okay.
All right,
Move to adjourn.
thanks.
1:33. Thank
Woo! Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, for all the work getting ready for today. I appreciate it.
I was gonna just.
Oh,
So these
there-
are
Feel
like
better.
the 4 brainstorming ideas from Tammy and Chris. Have Holly,
Yeah.
or widen so that Vince